Now, as you can see on the screen, when I talk of appearance, I have given pictures of 3 different cats. Now, all of them are cats, but they look quite different from each other. So, the first one is like brownish, the second one is black and white, spotted, the third one has the appearance, it looks like a tiger, but it's a cat again. So, all of these, they have different appearance. So when I talk about appearance, it is the external features, maybe the color, the shape, the size. So all these things fall under appearance. Now let's take these 2 objects. So when I talk about appearance, how will you compare these two? So on one hand we have a sample of wood, and on the other hand we have a sample of gold. So do you think that both of them appear identical? Absolutely not. So when I look at the wood, I can see that it is quite dull, but when I look at the gold, I see that it's very shiny, it is very bright, it has its own brightness and shine. So that is one basic thing which very distinctly separates the two. So if a piece of wood and a piece of gold is kept side by side, just by looking at them, you can say that, okay, these two are 2 different things. So appearance. So when we talk about appearance, most of the metals, they have a luster. Now what is luster? Luster is nothing but a shine. So normally metals are shiny, they have shiny surfaces, and that is one important reason why metals are used for making jewelry, like gold, silver. They are all used for making jewelry because of their luster. Now some of the metals have more luster compared to others. So here let's look at some of the metals like gold, silver, copper, zinc, aluminium, iron, sodium, magnesium, potassium, calcium, cobalt, and nickel. So these are the various metals, and just look at each of their pictures, and everywhere you see that they have their own shine. Maybe gold is more shiny when compared to iron. So that's possible. But when you compare these metals with other objects, maybe with paper or with cloth, so obviously their shine is more. Have a lot of materials which do not have any luster, they do not have any shine on their surface. So some of the common examples are wood, cardboard. As you can see, this cardboard box, it doesn't have any shine of its own. You talk about a pen, so a pen which can be made up of a plastic, so the plastic doesn't have any shine. You talk about a cloth, the cloth doesn't have any shine of its own. Now in order to make it shiny, you might put some additional stuff and make it look shiny, but otherwise a cotton cloth as such will not have its own shine. The next property that we would talk about is hardness. Now when I talk about hardness, it's like, it's a very simple term, it's a very common term which we use in our day-to-day life. You think of a teddy bear and you think of softness because it's very soft and cuddly. When you think of something, a statue made up of iron maybe, so that seems to be very hard. Even if you strike it with something, it doesn't break easily. So that way is also objects can be grouped into 2 categories, soft materials and hard materials. So when we talk about hard materials, they are very difficult to compress. So you just cannot compress them, you just cannot stretch them. So they are very hard. So they retain their own shape and size. Whereas the soft materials, you can just compress them, you can stretch them. You think of the teddy bear again, so it looks huge, but if you press it really hard, so it kind of gets compressed, it kind of gets smaller. So that way it's flexible. So those are soft materials. So when you think of soft materials, you can think of a cotton candy, you can think of a sponge. So these are all very soft materials, so you can just press them, you can kind of press them into different shapes. Whereas in case of hard materials, you can think of the wooden furniture, maybe the bed, chairs, tables, cupboards. So you just can't press them, or you cannot compress them, you cannot stretch them. So they are quite hard. You think of a hammer, so that's again quite hard. So these are examples. So that's how, just by looking at materials, you can say which one is hard and which one is soft. Because how these help, so when you want to create something, let's again, the example of the bell. So for the bell, you do not need a soft material, you needed a hard material. So you chose metal. Now, again, if you talk about metals, they are generally hard, so it's like they cannot be easily broken into different parts. However, if you actually start hammering them very hard, so you might be able to break it. But as such, they are like very hard and tough and cannot be easily cut. So let's look at this picture. This will again tell us about a new property that we are going to talk about. So what do you see? There are two roads. The first road, which you see here, seems to be very smooth if you look at the texture of the road. The second road, which you see here, it seems to be, kind of rough. The surface seems to be rough. So there we talk about, again, a new property, that is smooth and rough. So certain substances, they have a smooth surface, whereas certain others have a rough surface. So that texture also determines a lot of things. For example, generally, let's look at examples. So when you talk about materials with smooth and rough surfaces, think of a mirror. So a mirror has a smooth surface, extremely smooth and shiny surface, because of which reflection of light can take place, and that's how we are able to see our images in the mirror. Similarly, if you think of a stainless steel spoon, so that also has a very smooth surface, and that also acts as a mirror to some extent. You think of a china bone plate, so that's also a very smooth surface, even though it is not shiny enough, but at least a very smooth surface. On the other hand, if you think of a place like this where you have a lot of stones, pebbles, and which makes the surface very rough, so there we are talking about a rough surface. You think of a wooden plank, so there again the surface is not smooth enough, so that's again a rough surface. So these are all different examples of smooth and rough surface. So depending on what kind of object we want to build, we can decide whether we want to pick a smooth material or a rough material. Next property is solubility. Solubility is for example, you think of this. You have a sugar solution. You put 2 teaspoons of sugar into water and mix it well. What do you get? You get a watery liquid. You do not get to see the particles of the sugar because it gets completely dissolved in the water. So we say that sugar is soluble in water. Whereas if you take 2 teaspoons of sand and put it into water, what happens? It doesn't mix properly with water, so you are still able to see the sand particles inside water. So we say that sand is insoluble in water. So a soluble solution would look somewhat like this, and insoluble particles when put into water would look somewhat like this. Now here we are going to discuss solubility in water. However, solubility can be discussed for any other liquids. For example, a particular material can be soluble in oil, it can be soluble in water, it can be soluble in any other fluid. So let's first talk about the soluble substances. So these are those substances which dissolve in water completely. So let us look at some examples of soluble substances. Think of sugar, salt. These are some very common examples. I'm very sure that you would have had the lime juice, where you put some lemon juice and you also add some sugar and salt and you mix them all together in water, and then you get a completely dissolved solution where you do not get to see either the sugar crystals or the salt particles. So everything gets completely dissolved in water. So that's how you get a very clear and clean solution. Even liquids are also soluble in water. Some liquids, for example, vinegar is one such example. Lime juice is another such example. So these are liquids, but they are completely soluble in water. Whereas when we talk about substances which are insoluble, that is, even if we try to mix them, no matter how much ever hard you try to mix them in water completely, but they will not dissolve completely. You will still be able to see their particles inside water. So the best example to understand this would be sand. So when you put some sand inside water, doesn't matter how much ever you stir, but what you get is some sand will remain at the bottom. So you will be able to see the particles. So you will actually not get a uniform clean solution. So sand is an example of insoluble substance. Chalk powder is another example of insoluble substances. So these insoluble substances, sometimes they settle at the bottom of the liquid, sometimes they float on the surface of the liquid, but you will always be able to see these particles distinctly. A lot of liquids are also insoluble. For example, coconut oil, you have other cooking oil. So these oils, mustard oil, coconut oil, these are also insoluble in water. So if you try to mix them with water, just try it out yourself. Take some mustard oil, put it in a glass of water, and what do you see? You can very distinctly see the mustard oil layer and the water layer separately. So generally the mustard oil layer will settle at the top. So that's how you will be able to understand that they do not mix completely.